on this computer. There we go. So guys, if you don't want to be filmed, remember to just turn your cameras off. Feel free to use the chat if you have any questions for Carlo, as I'm sure you all do. And yeah, Carlo. So I met you, what was it, like
Oh, good Lord.
13 years ago?
Yeah, probably. When we
And
were both babies. But
I
yeah.
know, right? So I remember that you started as a lawyer
Yes.
in the film industry. Your parents must have been so proud.
Well, my parents were pressing for me to do something vaguely useful in their opinion. So I did, and it was part of my plan to move from Italy and come and study over here. My compromise with them was actually to do something more kind of professionally driven than some of the other subjects I might have actually thought about. And so I did qualify as a lawyer, and then very quickly trumped them by basically bringing it back to the creative industries and turned myself into a film and TV lawyer quite early on in my career. Did that for 3 or 4 years, found that it was a really good way to get to know everyone within the industry. And at the time, I was doing mostly film and mostly independent international co-productions. And when I felt I'd gathered enough contacts, I decided that was the time to kind of follow my heart. I'd never really kind of seen myself long term as a lawyer, and so I set up on my own and started working with producers in putting the independent projects together, financing them, helping find talent, helping devise strategies to take the projects out to market. And so I sort of followed a model that in the States was reasonably well known, called producer repping, which was effectively working as a business partner for creative and physical producers to help them find a way to get their project made, first of all, and then to take their projects out to market. And very quickly off the back of that, and off the back of the relationships I was starting to create and the people I was working with, I found myself much more deeply involved in production, started co-producing a couple of projects, particularly foreign projects that needed partners here in the UK, and then ended up producing a couple of things as lead producer. One of them with the Met Film people that got us to meet way back when, many years ago, and did that as an independent through my own company for about 10 years, and then at the end of 2011, it would have been, I got approached by Scoffrey, which is Ridley Scott's company here in the UK, to run the business and strategy side of the UK business, which was effectively the international non-US business. And I wasn't at the time looking for a job, and I was actually very happy having the kind of portfolio career that I could have through my own company. I was doing lots of different things. I was teaching a film school. I was working with a film distributor. I was working for a fund. I was still executive producing a number of projects with the producers that I developed relationships with. But the opportunity to kind of see the other side, particularly coming mainly from an art house independent, festival film side, as I had been working in up to that point, and actually switching to the realities of Ridley, even from his London office, which is not the office making all of the giant American blockbusters, was actually really attractive. And so I put my company on ice and joined Scoffrey at the beginning of 2012, and was with Ridley for about 6 years, 6.5 years, until May 2018.
I mean, and I mean, so many questions about really, but while you're on and then what sort of after that was that Endor after that, or was there something in between?
There's something in between which is connected. So one of the reasons why I joined Scoffrey was also that they were set up as a company developing both independent film and television, and the ability to return to television drama. And bear in mind, in 2012, television wasn't quite what it is now, but you could see the signs. We'd had the first True Detective. You could see that there was a type of television that could be really filmic and really creatively interesting and challenging. And I was really fascinated by the kind of the longer form and the ability to create those stories that go above and beyond the sort of 90 to 120 minutes and take you with them sometimes for multiple seasons. So I was really interested in getting back into that. I'd done some television work as a lawyer, but I'd never really done it as a producer or executive producer. And so one of the attractive aspects of joining Scott Free was actually the ability to plunge back into that. And over 6 years, we made lots of films. We made at least one film a year, and often one drama film and one non-scripted film a year off the back of our Life in a Day franchise. But it took us a long time to get our first television project off the ground. And that was an 8-part series that we ended up making for BBC One and FX in the States called Taboo, which we made with Tom Hardy and written by Steve Knight of Peaky Blinders. Lots of stories about that one too. And Taboo was an absolute baptism of fire for me because it was a really complicated series in lots of ways for lots of reasons. And if you look at the credit list, lots of very big personalities to deal with, but really rewarding in the end and a brilliant journey to be on. And when we came to the end of that, I mean, it got released from memory, would have been early 2017 in the end. I sort of wanted to do more of the episodic drama, and I wanted to learn more, and I wanted to build on what I'd started learning with Taboo. And there wasn't anything immediately coming up the pipeline at Scott Free. And so I worked on another couple of films and then started keeping an eye out for potential television opportunities, and very quickly got called to this job that I ended up doing for 3 years at an international television studio called Red Arrow, which is part of the ProSieben Group, so owned out of Germany. And I joined Red Arrow in June 2018 to run their scripted division. And that meant two things effectively. On the one side, I was overseeing the slate of projects that we were developing in-house, and building the slate with the team that I'd inherited were wonderful, and building and extending the relationships that we had with external talent in the scripted drama space. And on the other side, Red Arrow also owned a family of production companies. They owned about 19, they still do. And while most of those companies focused on reality and unscripted, there used to be 6, there are now 5 that are predominantly or exclusively scripted, drama or comedy companies. And so the other half of my job was actually overseeing those scripted companies, one of which is Endor. So I was the Red Arrow point of contact for Endor in terms of overseeing their strategy and also helping them convert as many of the projects on the slate as possible, providing development funding when needed, providing production funding when needed, and when we could align our requirements. And the first thing that I greenlit in my Red Arrow job was in fact an Endor show called Vienna Blood, which came out on BBC Two about 2 years ago. And we ended up also selling it to PBS in the States and France Television. It was co-commissioned by ZDF in Germany and ORF in Austria. We've just launched the second season, which comes out here in the UK on the 10th of December. So we got the 3 Fridays running up to Christmas, including Christmas Eve, which I'm told is a great honor, and go out again on PBS in the States in January. And we just closed finance on season 3. So that series effectively was the beginning of my love affair with the Endor team, and it's been a very, very happy relationship. And I ended up doing the first 2 seasons with my Red Arrow hat on, and then switching over to Endor and becoming part of the leadership here in May. And we'll now be doing season 3 and hopefully beyond as Endor, working with my former colleagues at Red Arrow to kind of get as much money out of them as I can, which is what we've been doing for the past few weeks. So it's it is a new role and a new job, but it's not quite as new as it might have been, just because I've been very close to the company, working with them for the past 3 years.
I mean, our conversations are always so rich, Carlo. And when I say conversation, I'm just listening and taking it in. So many questions, but so like from what you like, so I'm guessing the students here and myself are more used to, you know, the independent way of doing, which is, you know, small budget and do as much as possible yourself.
Yeah.
And you come in into a different system and you're very top level. So what does that look like for you in terms of, do you have creative sort of input as well as, you know, putting the business of things together?
Yeah.
Do you
Yes.
with the writers, do you, you know, how does that come about, or does it depend on each show, or how?
Yeah. You know, I mean, bear in mind, I mean, I was in the, you know, lower budget independent world for a long time, so I still remember that and what that requires. And in reality, independent television has over the past few years become much more like independent film in terms of approach, even though I'll admit with much bigger budget and much bigger pressure on delivering a certain level of output. But the principles and the journey is pretty similar. And the other secret that I don't know whether people talk about openly is whatever I'm finding, you know, I left the art house side of the industry behind to work with Ridley, and now I'm here in sort of, you know, what should be very well capitalized television drama. And the thing that you discover when you actually try different areas of the industry is that there's never enough money. That is never enough money for any project you want to make. Somehow the you know, I'm generalizing here, but the number of times you find yourself with a creative vision and an ambition that requires more resources than you might have is very, you know, has been very surprising to me, even when you work at much bigger levels than all of you might be used to. I think it's part of the process of always striving for better and always striving for more, and the pressure that the industry puts on us in terms of being very competitive at the moment, particularly in the television drama space. That said, we operate very much in a way that I think will sound very familiar to you. We have an extensive network of talent relationships. So we have a lot of writer and directors who are friends of the company, and you know, and sometimes actors who are friends of the company and will bring us material that they're interested in working on, and we look at it and assess whether we feel that there's a fit, whether we feel that we're the right company to deliver what they need, whether also we feel that the project fits with our slate and with our direction. So that's one way in which we get projects to the door. We also try to keep a very active approach to the kind of content that we develop and look to produce. So we don't just react to things that come to the door. We very regularly, and it's part of my job to make the team very regularly look at the slate, take a step back, look at it objectively, analyze it in terms of the kind of genres of projects we have, the kind of size of projects we have, where we think we're going to be taking those projects in terms of commissioning entities or streaming platforms. And we constantly strive to make sure that we have a very cohesive mix of projects on that slate. And we also constantly look to the market and the trends out in the market to try to identify if there's something that we're not doing that we should be doing, if we have too many projects in one particular type of genre and not enough in another. So that process of rebalancing the slate is constant. And when we identify that we have gaps or imbalances, then obviously we go out and actively try to look for material that will help us fill those gaps or even out the kind of composition of the slate. And we'll do that by again reaching out to the writers that we know that we like, by doing a round of the talent agents and asking them, you know, being very specific in our ask about what we're looking for and seeing if they're able to bring us things that might fit those requirements, or the kind of brief that we're going out with. We'll also try and use our group resources. So we go up to a parent company, Red Arrow, and check whether they've come across anything that might fit the bill that we may be able to look at. Sometimes we'll try and come up with the ideas ourselves and then commission a writer that we've had an eye on, that we wanted to find something to develop with. We might commission them to do something in a way almost to instruction if we feel that there's a very clear path to meeting a need on our slate. And then, of course, we are in the same game as all of you of how to fund that development process. And I think from our side, we take it very seriously that the talent we work with should be paid, because we know there's lots of situations in which writers and writer directors have to work speculatively. We feel that when they come to work with a company of our size and our track record, that's when they should have a payday in order to be able to then work speculatively in other circumstances. And so we take the raising of development funding very seriously. We want to make sure that everyone that works with us is properly covered for their time. But that again requires us to go out. So some of the development funding we can cover ourselves through the revenues we generate through our productions. We always every year earmark a pot of funding to put into development, but that only takes us so far. And so we'll then talk to Red Arrow, parent company, to see if we can get them to back development on specific projects. We'll go out and try and place projects directly with broadcasters to get the broadcasters to fund development on some of them. We go to other international distributors and studios to get those development resources, and really try to keep as many projects moving forward constructively as we can. And then, of course, we get to the a very similar process of talent packaging, potentially looking at whether to attach a director or potentially one or more actors to the projects that we've developed before we take them out into the market. The difference, I guess, from independent film, and I don't know whether any of you have had experiences in television, that we are much more tied traditionally to identifying the primary territory where the project will be anchored, as we say, and identify which partner, which television channel or streaming platform will be the primary partner around which we then build the rest of our financing and production structure. And so a lot of it is about identifying culturally where the story of the show actually taps into. It's not necessarily where you're going to make it physically. It's really about where the story is set, what kind of cultural setup it taps into, which point of view it represents. And obviously a lot of what we develop tends to be anchored here in the UK, just by virtue of the fact that we are physically here, and a lot of the talent that we work with is here. But not necessarily. We have just sold a show to the CBC in Canada because the show is set in a very specific, diverse, inclusive neighborhood of Toronto. We are in the process of selling a show to one of the streamers in Italy because, again, the specifics of the show require it to be set in Italy. It fundamentally needs to be set near a volcano with the kind of power that Vesuvio has in Naples. And so there were not that many places in the world where you can actually set it. And so although it's a show created by two Israeli writers who work out of the States, and it's been developed by me here in the UK, it ends up being sold primarily in Italy. But it's trickier to go out and sort of present the project to a lot of international partners until you've actually identified where that key commission, that anchor commission actually is for your show. And then, of course, now, as of the past few years, we're in this kind of dual reality where you can put shows together traditionally like that. You find your cornerstone commission, and then you go out to the international market and you either pre-sale one or more territories, or you find a couple of foreign co-producers to bring on board. You calculate what soft monies, tax credits, and other subsidies you may be able to access through the production. You look at what the gap is, and you try and get that gap from the international market through an MG from an international distributor, which is what we call sales agents in television or similar. Or, of course, you go all the way into the new streaming world and you do a one-stop shop deal with a Netflix or Amazon or Apple or Disney Star, you name it. There's more and more players in that space where you end up not retaining any ownership in your show and not necessarily retaining any meaningful profit participation if the show does well over time, but you access a very generous cash checkbook that enables you to make the show usually at a very generous budget level, and which and that can be very important for shows with a very ambitious vision. So from our side at Endor, we try to make sure that we play in both camps, and we try to make sure that we again keep a balance between the shows that we fund, through streaming deals where we give everything away, we make them effectively, we end up making them as producers for hire, and the shows that we make through the kind of traditional patchwork of multiple funding sources where we can hold on to some ownership and some back end. And so at the moment we are in production. We started shooting last Thursday in Scotland on an Amazon Studio show, which is shooting at the Lead Studios, which is a Neil Gaiman adaptation called Anansi Boys. And that is a show that we're making effectively for Amazon. Amazon will own it, and will exploit it across the world through their platform, through Amazon Prime forever. But it did mean that, the Amazon muscle enabled us to find the best way technologically to render Neil's phenomenal vision. And so we're shooting the show 90% in virtual production, which is something that I don't think is actually been done yet by a non-US studio. It's very much the Mandalorian style of production. And we're only able to do that really because we've got the kind of financial muscle that Amazon offers behind us. Blood instead, we've financed with multiple parties, and Red Arrow was instrumental in funding a big chunk of the show, and then taking it out to UK partners, US partners, French partners, Australian partners, and making sure that their upfront investment could be covered through sales of the show to multiple partners across the world. And we're very excited about that because we are building a franchise. We're now going into making season 3. We've already got development plans for season 4 and beyond. And over time, building something that, as a production company, you own a chunk of like that across multiple seasons can really provide you with the solidity and the stability to then free you up to do lots of other things and sometimes take a lot more risks on the some of the other projects that you look at converting from your slate. We're a company that traditionally has done a lot of first features and first opportunities in the TV series space, and we want to continue to be able to do that. But to be able to take those risks, you also need the solidity, the stability that a returning series brings you. And so we're very happy that we're actually now in that space. The other thing I should say about Endor is that, which is again very important to me. I mean, the way that I joined Scot-Free because I really wanted to make television. I joined Endor also because I wanted to be able to come back into film. And we do have a film slate. It's somewhat secondary to the television slate. And by that, what I mean is we don't aggressively go out into the market and look for film projects because we are owned by a television group. And so our primary focus needs to remain on television content. But we will consider film projects, single film projects that will come to us from talent that we have a relationship with already, or film projects that, for whatever reason, speak very directly to one of our creative team. And so we probably have about 10 film projects out of an overall slate of about 45 projects. You can get the proportion. But luckily, we are getting to make 2 of them next year. We just financed in fact, we're in the process of announcing one, and we're in the process of closing finance on the second one. So we are at a bit of an interesting turning point for the company. For me, particularly, because on the one side, we've got a first big global streaming commission with the Amazon Studios project, and we also have the first big fantasy project, which is quite different from what Endor has done in the past with Anansi Boys. And on the other side, we're going back into actively making features, one of which at least will be theatrical. And so I'm seeing 2022 as the year where we're going to be shouting from the mountaintops about all the different things that Endor can make, also in these areas where we've been that we've been absent from for a little while, and certainly before I arrived. So I feel like it's a very fortunate moment to be able to build on the expansion of the company.
Wow, I mean, it's fascinating. How, with your slate of projects, how far ahead do you tend to think? Like, and so that's, I guess, the first question. Do you think in terms of time, or, like the next year, the next 5 years, and the next 10 years? And then I guess the second question is, do then things like, Squid Game change where you tend to go or how you tend to think?
So on the first question, I've always had jobs that were reasonably strategic, and so my outlook has always been sort of the 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. I think even with 5 years, anything any of us can do is just guessing. So beyond that, I kind of feel like you're literally into sci-fi territory. But within Endor, we are then part of a group that's also listed on the stock exchange in Frankfurt. We are quoted, and therefore forecasting is part of our bread and butter. And our finance director and I spend a lot of time providing forecasts. And what we tell our parent company, and what we try to be very honest about, is that our forecast for the next 12 months is reasonably accurate, other than the fact that we all know, and if any of you who actually worked on films will know, until the film is in the can, anything can happen. And so you can absolutely say, we are financed for these 4 projects next year, and this is what they cost to make, and this is what our return will be, and all of that. But any of them could go wrong at any point in time, and so we always have to have those caveats. But we can be at least quite granular about what we see our forecast being for the next 12 months. 24 months, reasonable, but with a certain degree of estimates or guesstimates, because inevitably, we have these 45 projects that we kind of keep as balls up in the air all the time, and genuinely, you can never tell which one is going to stick. I mean, I constantly get surprised by the projects that we manage to place, and by the projects that we might have thought were slam dunks that we just don't get over the line, or don't get over the line now, and might find that we get over the line in the next 2 or 3 years. So I think when we come to 2023 and onwards, what we tend to say is our aim is to be able to make another 3 television series and another couple of films, and ideally of those 3 television series, at least 1 will be returning. And if there's a second one that's returning and we manage to get 4 shows up and running and a couple of films, even better. But we sort of set ourselves parameters based on our experience and what we've been able to do so far, and the state of maturity that our slate is shown at any point in time. Beyond that, in reality, becomes a statement of ambition. In terms of what we can do 3 to 5 years from now, it's actually what we want to be able to do, and what we prepare in the slate to be able to do. We know that we need to be in development now on most of the projects that we will be making in 5 years' time, because that's how long as it takes. So we know that we're going to need to be able to plant those seeds now, and we're always planting seeds at a very kind of early level, because we know it takes that long. But beyond that, it does become a case of really sort of trying to determine what our ambition and our targets should be. Add to that the fact that, particularly over the past 3 or 4 years, and leaving aside the pandemic, which has also accelerated a lot of trends, but even before the pandemic, we were in a world where things in both independent film and television drama were changing so quickly that business models were not staying the same for longer than 6 to 12 months, and then they were changing again. And then the pandemic came and accelerated lots of trends. It accelerated the dependency on streamer consumption. It accelerated the demise, and hopefully now some kind of revival of the independent theatrical sector. It made us all question how certain sides of the industries are operating. that pace of change is not slowing down. And so it's you need to be aware of the fact that if you're forecasting for, what may be happening 3 years from now or 5 years from now, you also need to be aware that the landscape will be different from what it is now, and we don't necessarily know what it will be like. And so all we can do in our forecasting and in our planning is to make sure that we are nimble enough and flexible enough and kind of outward looking enough to be able to spot the signs and then adapt our strategy and adapt our slate to what the future may require. Which brings me to your question about Squid Game. Squid Game and the Queen Gambit before it and every other trendy project that ever lands are obviously really relevant for us. I mean, we need to watch them, study them, interrogate them, understand what they tell us about the industry and audience appetite. That said, I've always been really resistant to kind of developing to order or developing out of panic. So we never do that thing of seeing the Squid Game is super popular and going, what can we find out there that looks and feels like it? Because in reality, by the time we found it and we've developed it and we've packaged it with the best will in the world, we'll have spent at most, I mean, the show that went from idea to production most quickly that I'm aware of that I was involved in took 20 months. I mean, that is a miracle to me. But ultimately, that is the timeline you're looking at. And by the time we've actually done that, other people would have got there first and probably better. And audience taste and audience requirements will have moved on to the next big thing. So I think we try to look at shows like Squid Game. First of all, whenever something comes out of one of the streaming platforms, particularly Netflix, you have to question what those numbers mean, because it's never, never entirely clear whether it means people have checked out 10 minutes of an episode and then moved on, but squillions of people have checked out 10 minutes of an episode because everyone was talking about it, or whether people truly watch every episode to the end of the season. I think that continuity and loyalty and degree of consumption is a really, really important factor that seems to be missing quite often from the conversations. So clearly Squid Game has been very successful because we all know lots of people that have been watching it. But again, I would encourage you all to investigate the numbers, interrogate the numbers, see what they actually mean about viewing patterns. And secondly, I also think what's interesting to us is really to look more at the bigger context and the bigger picture of what Squid Game brought to audiences at this particular point in time, why it gave them something that they might not have found elsewhere, what it says about audience taste now, what it says about potentially societal trends now, and what we should take as a lesson from that. Not necessarily about what audiences want right now, but how can we learn from that to look at societal trends and look at development of audience taste and try to some extent guess, which is never easy, what may be responding to an appetite in 1, 2, 3 years time. But also what I think is really important is actually take that message that ultimately these shows that prove really successful are shows that are different and brave and a bit of a gamble compared to what was actually considered, safe and reliable within the market at that particular time. And so what I think the benefit for us of a show like Squid Game is that we are then able to go back into platforms and broadcasters, to go back to commissioners and effectively say, I've got something quite different from anything that you're doing at the moment, and quite different potentially from anything that is being seen by viewers at this point in time. However, let's think about whether this can actually really be the project that sets a trend, that taps into a need, that becomes a thing that people talk about. Because ultimately, if we don't do things that are different from the trend, we never create those game changers like Squid Game has been. So I think it's really useful to give us the courage to have those conversations, and also to give us a little bit of ammunition to go back to commissioners and just say, don't give me that. We don't do this, because if you ever want to break out in the way of those shows, you need to take a risk. I mean, you might not think that this is the right one to take a risk. That's a legitimate response, but at least consider, whether and when and how to take that risk that might give you a proper game changer.
That's amazing. I have a couple of questions from students.
Sure.
So the first one is, Taboo was a very periodical to the 1800s. Was there any particular difficulties in producing this while staying authentic to the period?
Yes, I mean, in the period itself was an interesting element, because Taboo was brought to us by Tom Hardy based on a concept by his dad. And his dad had placed the concept much more in kind of Gothic Victorian England, sort of 1850s, I think it was, when he first came to us. And when we then started taking the show out to writers, and we were very lucky to strike this partnership with Steve Knight, Steve actually looked at it and thought, there's an infrastructure, there's an underlying substance to it that I'm kind of finding missing at the moment. So where can I place it that gives me a world that I can actually tap into in a much more interesting way? And so he brought it forward to the beginning of the 19th century and the East India Company, and he brought that element of Britain's trading wars, the colonial aspect, and the damage and the hurt that had created coming back to haunt our protagonists back in the UK. And suddenly that became a much more interesting, rich, layered project. And we were phenomenally lucky that obviously we were doing it. I mean, I was phenomenally lucky that I was able to work on it through scot-free, because Ridley himself became a real asset for the project when it came to making sure that we delivered the reality, the authenticity of the period in the best possible way. Ridley, as you all know, at that point hadn't really himself as a director done television. He produced television, and again, for us on Taboo, he was an executive producer, but he became a very hands-on creative executive producer. And the first thing that he had promised Tom when we pitched ourselves to be Tom Hardy's producing partners on the show was that we would make sure we would make the show the most filmic it could possibly be. And in his film work, Ridley has phenomenal experience of recreating period, and he recreates period beautifully. He recreates period as beautifully and accurately as he recreates the future. So we really tapped into his knowledge and his network of contacts. We ended up surrounding our directors with a group of heads of department who were all coming from the film side. They had all done really specific period before with Ridley and also in other projects. And we're able to go back to the BBC, who were, much more oriented towards making this as a traditional television period drama, and put to them a whole host of creative heads of department that the BBC had never worked with, who they were quite freaked out by at the beginning, but who came from that very sumptuous, ambitious, accurate film world. And it was a bit of a battle to get the BBC to sign off on the approach, but I think it's the approach that really made a difference and enabled us to render that period vision very effectively. And a huge amount of research went into it. I mean, obviously not research I take any credit for. It was all our creative heads who spent a phenomenal amount of time going into the detail of what the world would have looked like. And so a lot of it we recreated in camera. And then, of course, chunks of it we had to recreate at CGI level with Blue Bolt, who did an amazing job of recreating the London skyline of the time, for instance, and creating set extensions to enable us to render that vision effectively. But it was really the filmic approach. It was the approach to Taboo as an 8-hour film rather than a classic television series that enabled us to tap into the resources and the know-how and the talent that enabled us to do that. And then on Before I Go to Sleep and the book adaptation process, I mean, every literary adaptation is different from the development of original ideas, but also different from one another, because I think you end up trying to get, trying to extract all of the goodness and the magic of the book, while sometimes not being necessarily limited to, by some of the constraints that the literary form can have as opposed to audiovisual. Before I Go to Sleep in itself ended up actually being a reasonably literal literary adaptation, because in the end, it's a thriller. For any of you that have either seen the film or read the book, it's a thriller. It's very much a high concept thriller. It's the story of a woman who's suffered this brain condition due to an accident, whereby every time she goes to sleep, her memory gets wiped out, and so every morning is literally a brand new day for her, and she has to remember who she is, who her husband is, what her life is like, how to navigate that for herself, and that in itself makes for a very strong premise and very strong starting point. There's a brilliant opening scene, in my opinion, with Nicole Kidman, going to the bathroom and seeing lots of photos pinned to the bathroom wall that try to tell her the story of who she is. And then her husband comes into the bathroom and she totally freaks out and thinks a stranger is attacking her. And he has to go through what he goes through every morning of telling her who he is and who she is, and why they've got to where they've got to and all of that. But then she starts seeing cracks in the stories and understands that actually not everything is how she sees it, and she starts doubting whether her husband is truly there for her own good or whether there's a backstory to it. So we clearly didn't want to mess with either their premise or their narrative, because it was very strong and it's very beautifully developed by S.J. Watson, who wrote the book. But what we could do was actually expand the world and also find ways to bring the perspective of Christine, the lead character, from inside her head to outside her head, because we had to take what was internalized in the novel and obviously make it much more accessible to a viewing audience. So that in itself was a really fascinating process. And as the cast came on board, it became very easy to kind of enable them to inhabit those characters and kind of finish developing those roles around who they were. We ended up blessed in a combination of Nicole Kidman, Colin Firth, and Mark Strong. So there was a really wonderful lineup that we were able to work with. But we've had lots of other literary adaptations that have required a very different approach. So I was involved in the development for a long time of a project we've unfortunately had to abandon, which was set in Glasgow, where the novel provided a really wonderful central character and a really interesting world, but had a very atmospheric but not narrative, a plot that was very atmospheric but not narratively strong enough. And so the process of development that we went through was actually to take that starting point of the world and the lead character, but actually find the writer that could be narratively driven enough to really create a very strong story with all the twists and the turns that a 6 or 8 part series requires, and then also leave us with enough of a cliffhanger at the end of season 1 to be able to return for a second season and potentially beyond. Whereas the novel was very finite. And we go into the same process with another set of novels that we're in the process of adapting at the moment. We finalized the option at the moment, so I can't tell you what they are because we don't actually own them yet. But again, we love the world, we love the characters. We didn't think the plot was strong enough. We've had to go into the option negotiations very open and honest about the fact that there were elements we really wanted to take and build, but that the author also needed to be aware of the fact that we wanted to be quite free in our adaptation and really take the plot in a different direction and potentially create the world, and then in subsequent seasons populate the episodes with what we call producer storylines, as in storylines we and our writer create originally, which are not storylines from the novels that the author has created, because we feel the novels are not particularly strong on plot. Not always an easy conversation to have, but you sort of need to have them at the outset and need to make sure that the author is either comfortable with that or knows where your approach is, and they can decide we're not the right fit and we're not the right partner. That's obviously entirely their prerogative. We have just optioned a great series of novels focused around a female detective called Helen Grace. And on those, the plots are superb. They're incredibly clever. They're very twisty-turny. There's a lot of plot to work with. And there's 11 novels published, and the second one is coming out next year. So our challenge on those is actually the opposite. I mean, we want our author, Matt Arledge, who is also going to adapt. He's a television writer and producer himself in his own right. So he's going to adapt his own novels. We've wanted him to pick the 4 or 5 strongest plots from the novels and then think about how he can use the episodic form to really build up the characters and create characters and character journeys for the lead recurring characters that will be really gripping in order for audiences to want to come back, not just for a great twisty crime plot, but because they actually want to see what happens to those characters they got really connected to, very much, kind of Luther fashion in a way. So yes, every literary adaptation poses its own challenges, and I think it's important to have that creative strategy clear before you even consider approaching the author, unless you have a relationship with the author already, because I think it's important to have those conversations at the outset and be very honest and transparent about what you see taking into the screen adaptation from the novel itself.
Thanks, Carlo. And then someone asked, when you switched from a legal background to indie film production, did you self-fund your projects initially, or how did you gain the capital to get up and running as an indie producer?
So I would, first of all, tell you all never to self-fund if you can possibly avoid it, because my take on a producer skill set is that your skill set is, what you bring is your knowledge, your skills, your abilities, your understanding of the material, the relationships you put together. And it's a very dangerous game to self-fund projects. I did end up making the mistake of putting some money on my own into one of the projects that I was lead producer on, and I had to remortgage my home and do all of the stuff that you hear talk about. And I'm very lucky. I mean, I'm still here, and I've built what I think is a reasonably solid career out of it. But I never did see that money back. So just to be clear, I survived through it rather than I'm not here to tell you that was a smart decision of mine and I got my cash back, and I'm still paying off the mortgage that I took on at the time. So I know how easy it is with the enthusiasm of coming into the industry to be tempted to do that. But I would absolutely urge you all to learn what all the sources of funding for projects are out there, and to study how best to play the game to actually access those sources. And also, you might not like hearing this, but to listen to the feedback from the market. Most of the times when I've been involved in projects that were pushed back from the market, or where I was aware of projects that got consistent pushback from the market, unfortunately, it was the projects that were the problem. And I know of a few that have got made since, and they never did find their audience, and they never did find a place to justify the time and effort that was put into them. So, let's also all of us remember, we're not on a privileged mission. We're not here, by the grace of whichever entity you might believe in, to bring our content to the world. we need to bring content to the world that the world actually wants. And I'm not for a second suggesting the market process is flawless, because it isn't, and it often ends up being quite lazy in the decision that they make. But it is the system we all need to learn to work with to be able to make sure that the content that we make actually finds its audience, finds its viewers, that you end up making something for somebody out there. I think, making that connection with an audience is ultimately the most important way for your stories to really be told in an effective way.
So Brian is asking, can you give us some examples of how to access those fundings? Are you talking about going to commissioners and broadcasters and, finding that anchor that you were talking about for your project and then selling it?
Yeah, I mean, depending on what the project is. I mean, with an independent film project, you will look at film distributors, you will look at sales agents, you will look at equity funds. There are companies that invest in film and television content, sometimes off the back of accessing certain types of tax reliefs, other times purely as a commercial investment. There are also, depending on the stories you tell, potential subsidies accessible. Sometimes if your story taps into either benevolent or socially positive stories, there are organizations that will provide some funding. The Wellcome Trust provides funding for projects that advance knowledge and insight in the world of science related particularly to mental illness, psychology, mental conditions. There's also systems of subsidies and support for projects that support production. So that if you make a film here, you will get 25% of your qualifying spend from shooting in the UK, including Scotland, back into your budget. Obviously, that doesn't get you started, and it's the last piece of your funding, not the first one. But it's important that you know about those elements, because you can build them within a finance plan and be aware that there's possibly a smaller amount that you need to ask your equity funders, your distributors, your sales companies, in order to reach your total budget, because some of your budget can be covered through softer sources. And sometimes there's private individuals. I mean, again, I've dealt with private individuals wanting to invest in film often in the past. I would say the success ratio is small. There's lots of people that like to talk about projects and tell you what they think and share their opinion, but they don't always end up writing that check, and you need to be quite careful about how much involvement and space and time you give them before you are sure that they're actually in there for the right reasons and willing to take the step that they need to take. Lots of them don't realize how complicated funding film is, and also how risky it can be. And so when they actually get an insight into the realities of it, they panic and run away, and you spend a lot of time quoting them for nothing. So it is a complicated jigsaw puzzle, but there are sources out there, and determination is rewarded. I mean, that's for sure. It pays to do your research and your homework and really learn how the industry works. Even if you're not interested in being particularly business oriented, even if you're coming from the creative side, the more you understand about how the industry works, the more power you take on for yourself to keep control of the destiny of your project. And that I think is really important.
That leads on perfectly to my next question, Carlo, which is, over the course of your career so far, what would you say are the main qualities that sort of saw you through? Determination for sure is one.
I mean, definitely stamina. I mean, this is a long road, and you need to be prepared for that, and you need to be prepared for the fact that sometimes things take a long time. I think curiosity is a really important element, both in creative terms and in practical and business terms. And it kind of ties back to what I was just talking about. But be curious about what other people in the industry do. Be curious about how other writers or directors or producers set their projects up. Reach out and talk to people and listen to their experiences, learn from their experiences. That's how we find how you can do things in a different way, because somebody else did it first, and you can kind of learn from them. Be outgoing and build relationships with people. You learn a lot from that, and it's important to be out and about, feeling connected to the industry. And I also think be pragmatic, be strategic. If you have an amazing, big budget, really ambitious project that has been your passion project forever, think long and hard about whether that's the project you want to go out to the market with first, or whether in fact you can build a stepping stone for yourself that's a little bit more achievable, where you take a more, a project that feels like a more fitting first-time project out first, and then off the back of the success of that, off the back of having delivered that, you actually start building towards your giant, ambitious dream project. I come across too many people whose ambition is disconnected from who they are, where they are in the market, the kind of track record they have. And we all need to be really honest and direct about where we fit within the marketplace, and therefore what we're actually able to get done and what not. I mean, that applies at all levels. I do it all the time. I mean, I'm reaching out to bigger partners on a couple of potential American projects we have, where I just know that I and Endor alone are not enough to really give our commissioners confidence we can deliver the kind of project we're talking about. And so you need to think about what people on the other side of the desk are going to expect to be presented with in order to be able to make a positive decision. Those have been key qualities, or key ambitions, at least for me. The final thing I would say, and it's really important, is be passionate. We're an industry that is, lots of people treat as a privilege rather than a business. But I do also believe genuinely we get to do wonderful things in the work that we do. And it is a privilege for me, certainly not coming from the creative side, always has been a privilege to work with talented, creative people. And I just feel if you're not still really passionate and really enthusiastic and really excited about being in it, then ask yourself whether this is the right fit. Because I can tell you, when I meet people who are not passionate about what they're doing and feel like they're going through the motions, or they kind of frustrated because they come with a lot of entitlement and they feel like things haven't kind of moved for them the way that they wanted, it's very off-putting. We all, we're an industry that feeds off energy, and we all know how challenging a journey can be to get films and television shows made, and you need to be with people that really, really, really want to be on for the ride. And so if at any point you feel that passion is dwindling, have a think, take a step back and think about how you might rekindle it. And sometimes it just means you've had your time in this industry, and there are other industries that will switch your passion on. But I think being passionate is really, really important.
Do you have time for one last question, Carlo?
Literally one, because unfortunately I've got a call to go on to, but I'll take one more.
Thank you. Have you ever had those same emotions when you wanted to walk away from it before you made it?
Yeah, many times. I mean, the time where I put a chunk of my mortgage into a project which made zero money, and leaving aside the financial, wasn't as good as it could have been, so didn't actually stand up to the ambition that I had for it, even creatively. That was hard, and you find yourself financially in a bit of a black spot, and you don't have a super special film to point to go like, look, I've made that, like, just give me some really great work because I've made that. I mean, that experiment hadn't worked, and it's difficult, and I've had to ask myself those questions about do I want to stay in this? Is there another world that would make me happier? Have I got stuff to contribute? And I've been lucky that I've sort of found my way through it, and whenever I was down, something happened to make me think, okay, there's still something I can do meaningfully in here to carry this on. But yes, I think most people would be lying if they tell you that they haven't got those moments of doubt. I think it's part and parcel of being a genuine, committed professional, that you should ask yourself from time to time. Also, it is a two-way street. So it's not just about, am I still happy? Also, have I still got something to contribute? Am I helping the process? Am I helping people? From my side specifically, I think if I found that I'm not helping, people that I feel are talented bring their stories out in one way or another, then I'd have to question whether I still have a role that's worth it. So yes, obviously.
Thank you so much, Carlo. It's been a privilege having you here this morning. So
my pleasure.
So much. And Brian is saying thanks for the honesty. Well, thank you. I'm sure we'll see you again soon, sometime in Scotland when you come up.
Absolutely. Come up and visit the set. That'd be great. Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone.
My pleasure. Lovely to meet everyone.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.